Hello, I'm Ciaran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode we bring latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode we have a sheep market focus. I'm joined by Seamus McMenamin, Sheep Sector Manager with Bord Bia. Seamus discusses some of the growth we've seen in key markets over the past 12 months and impact that global trade partners have on the competitiveness of Irish lamb. Seamus outlines the influence of China on the world sheep meat trade, particularly in relation to New Zealand lamb exports, and how that impacts the European market. We discussed the effects of Brexit on UK production levels, supply into the EU market, and the impact it has on transport of Irish lamb to the continent. James discussed some potential growth in the Middle East, Asian, and potentially US markets, as well as the welcomed increase in domestic retail. He outlines the importance customers place on quality assurance certification and delivering lambs to market specification. And we finish up with James discussing the outlook for sheep meat trade in 2021. We start off, however, with James reviewing some of the key highlights from the sheep meat trade during the past 12 months, the overall throughput and lamb imports from Northern Ireland.
And I suppose if we take a look at 2020 as a whole, sheep meat production did increase by 3%. There was a few things that sort of drove into that. There was a strong increase in the hogget throughput in the first quarter of the year. That was both coming from local supplies and imports from Northern Ireland. And then there was another peak then in throughput then in July and August, both with a lot of men killing lambs earlier, both in response to just sort of a strong market and good demand for the lambs. One maybe thing that did result in that was a reduction in the number of heavy lambs in the sort of slaughter mix, and a half a kilo drop in the average carcass weight. So overall, our total kills sort of went from 2.8 million up to 2.9 million, driven primarily by an increase in the lamb and the hogget throughput. I mean, that was despite a very, very tight last quarter for the lamb throughput, just with the earlier slaughterings. And the other thing was then there was a 5% reduction in the yolk throughput, which will probably lead to an increase in the breeding flock this year.
It wasn't by any manner of means a typical year. You mentioned there, like that earlier throughput of lamb in the beginning of that had a carryover effect on that drop off in carcass weight. Probably more in response, maybe, Seamus, to a higher price or more stable price at that time of year too.
Yeah, it was just quite a strong market and good demand, particularly from the export markets. So it did encourage people to sort of kill your lambs earlier, and they just there was a half a kilo drop in the average carcass weight, and then because lambs were gone out of the system, then there was a real tightening in supply then as we moved into the last quarter. Now, another thing that would have impacted that, there was a notable decline in the number of lambs that were coming down the road from Northern Ireland as well. I suppose they're in a similar situation to ourselves, where they had a very strong throughput earlier in the year, and then there was just stronger demand for all the lambs that were in the north, so that just reduced then the availability of lambs then for coming down the road. So I think last year, overall there was a drop of just close to 20,000 in the number of lambs and hoggets that came down the road from Northern Ireland. But I suppose as we sort of discussed, the northern trade is important to keep there. We do need it to sort of maintain throughput. But I suppose it's just good to keep an eye on it there as to what sort of levels it's running at.
It adds a national pool too. You mentioned there already, like the yolk kill for last year was down 5%. Probably maybe a little bit of a response to more yolks being retained. It'll be interesting to see this year's census. That drop in the north, James, I suppose we've seen something similar. Maybe were there more ewe lambs retained than that, or
there would be more ewe lambs retained as well, and then their higher throughput would sort of impacted the supply of lambs that are available in Northern Ireland. As well as that, there's been more appetite from the processors in Northern Ireland. They're now killing more than 60% of the lambs being produced in Northern Ireland, and usually it would have been 45% or thereabouts that they would have been killing. So there has been an increased appetite from the processors in Northern Ireland to keep their own lambs, and then supplies in the Republic. Then I suppose there's been a few factors that have featured in there, such as the earlier killing of the lambs sort of in the summer. Then last year was a 53-week year, which meant that there would be an extra roughly 40,000 lambs that were killed maybe in 2020 that usually would have been carried over. And then, as you mentioned, the higher ewe lamb retention. As I said, it's very hard to know the impact of ewe lamb retention or how many have been kept. And there is an opportunity now with the quite strong prices for some of those to be released back onto the market, maybe, and go through some of the processing plants.
And certainly, I know some will probably touch on later on, but there could be more of a demand at this time of year. A lot will be tempted at that price. Look, it is a market that's quite responsive to price changes. Last year, despite maybe some dips in it, it was probably it's one of the stronger years we've seen. The impact that had, like we've seen, you mentioned that drop in carcass weight seeded, more responsive lambs being drafted earlier. How did that price hold up if you look at it over the whole year?
If you take the whole of 2020, the average price was 5.24 cents a kilo. So that was nearly 50 cents a kilo ahead of 2019. I suppose, as we know, as you said, like the lamb market is very, very responsive to supply and demand. So it's sort of important we look back at 2018 as well. And the average price then was 5.04 cents a kilo. So you're still 20 cents a kilo ahead of that. Now, as we moved into 2021, the market was particularly strong, and then it sort of came under some pressure, but it has shown recovery now in the last week or so, and it's sort of encouraging maybe a few men to kill a few more. I think the availability has improved a wee bit, just with that increase in the quotes.
Like, just if you have a chance to look back at it now, but what drove some of that demand in terms of the markets? Like, where do we grow the share? And I know the domestic one certainly has changed slightly, and you'll allude to that later on. But where was the growth in that, James, to push that demand?
There was a couple of things maybe that a lot of people maybe didn't see coming. The big thing was the EU market. Overall, there was a 3% reduction in the EU in the lamb that they produced in 2020, and then on top of that, then there was a 4% decline in the volume of lamb that was imported into Europe. So then this just created a shortness in supply in the EU, which then we could benefit from. We obviously exported more of our product over. The drop in imports from New Zealand was sort of driven by them redirecting a lot of product into the Chinese market in particular, and other Asian markets, and they only used 46% of their quota, which is the lowest since it was put in place. And then to add to that as well, with Brexit in the UK, sort of realigning itself trade-wise, there was a 12% reduction in the volume of sheep meat that the UK exported to the EU last year. And I think AHDB, which are sort of the equivalent of Bord Bia in England, they've released their forecast for 2021, and they're forecasting that that's going to decline by another 4% next year. So that just creates opportunities for Irish exporters then on the EU market. We produce a very similar high quality product, and we're probably best placed of anyone to sort of take market share of UK exporters in sort of our key EU market.
Well, our export market is very sensitive to changes at a global scale. Like you mentioned, New Zealand going into China, and that tariff might come back on that again. But you've seen growth there in a number of them EU countries over the past year.
Yeah, look, we've seen growth in the EU in particular. So we've grown our exports to some of our key regions. So you've got Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, France, all increases in terms of volume demand. And the values also increased to the EU. Now that would have been a key driver behind a lot of what we exported, but there was some growth in non-EU markets as well. Switzerland, I suppose, was one market that we were particularly successful in 2020. There was some growth in what we sent to China, sort of indirectly, and then to Singapore. But there was a decline sort of in exports to other non-EU regions, I suppose, just on the back of COVID and the impact on the global market. Yeah. But the EU has been our sort of a standout performance market, and as I've alluded to, there's been a few reasons for that. You know, the drop in production and the drop in imports, and then the fall off in UK exports. So it gave us plenty of opportunity on the EU market in particular this year.
Like, part of that opportunity was drove by the demand in China for the past year, and that shift in New Zealand. Maybe just before we talk about the Chinese market slightly, like the quota for New Zealand post Brexit, we're aware they're one of the biggest exporters into that market. So they were. How has that panned out since, Seamus? Just to refresh the listeners.
Well, the quota for New Zealand to the EU was just split down the middle based on like past use of the tariff. So the UK would have taken about half of what the New Zealand would have exported to Europe. So they've now got 50% of the quota. So it'll be no real change in terms of the amount of product available. Then for the remaining EU, we've just got half of what the original quota was.
So their potential presence is more or less the same as where it was always going to be. But
more or less, yeah. More or less.
I suppose maybe what's driving that opportunity for us is their shift in the direction their supply to China. Like that has had a big impact on the global sheep meat trade for the year.
Yeah, like the impact of China on the global sheep market, it can't be underestimated. They imported more than a third of all the sheep meat traded globally in 2020. They're coming off the back of a decline in pig meat production, and the lack of availability of pork. So they're looking for their other proteins. So their per capita consumption did increase. Now it's off a very small base, but it's a massive population. So there was up by 1.5% there in 2021. Yeah, there was some reports maybe of the demand for lamb in China not being as strong maybe as it had been earlier in the year. But I suppose the latest data that we're getting from New Zealand and Australia is that their exports actually formed an increase in November and December there in the run up to Chinese New Year. So there's a continuing demand for lamb in China, and it's just about the impact on the global market is huge. And the more they take off the global market, obviously the less there is available to come to the EU. I suppose at the minute, for the total year, China took about just over half of everything that New Zealand exported, but I think in December it actually took more than 2/3 of what New Zealand exported, which I think just goes to show the massive impact that they have on the global market.
Swallowing up a hell of a lot of that trade, and even maybe more opportunities for us in it.
I think that's exactly it. They're redirecting a lot of product away from the EU market, and that gives us opportunity in sort of key EU markets, and that's sort of what's been driving the growth. Driving the growth. Now, obviously, direct access to China remains a priority for us, and it remains, it was very close there just in the run up to COVID. Direct access to China would be very important. They take a lot of products maybe that aren't that popular on some of our other markets, for carcass balance and things, and then access to China, opens up gateways into other Asian markets.
Just like and it would be an important development again, and it's important, I suppose, to consider not all our product our carcass are high value cuts. You need an outlet for them all in it.
Yeah, carcass balance, like that's your export markets are very important, particularly your non-EU ones, like for that carcass balance, and sort of try and get the biggest return for every part of the carcass.
Like if we're talking about markets, we have to talk about the UK. Obviously, with Brexit, there's a lot of questions up about where goes the war, our biggest competitor in the EU market. But Seamus, like tariff-free trade into the UK, the impact they're going to have on their lamb going into the EU. How has it affected us, but how is it going to affect us going forward?
Yeah. I suppose in 2020, the UK sort of shifted its focus in some ways towards its domestic market, I suppose, to drive by some of their big retailers towards, buying British and focus on homegrown and things like that. It actually meant that there was a 12% reduction in what they exported to the EU market last year. And as I've already mentioned, they're forecast to further decline then in 2021. Obviously, with the trade deal currently in place, they have tariff-free access to the EU, but it doesn't really mean that their trade's unhindered. Like there's still non-tariff barriers that need to be overcome. So you've got your additional checks and additional time, and there's obviously costs associated with that, and that just adds cost maybe to the UK offer and gives us an opportunity then on the UK market, because their competitiveness is sort of being reduced somewhat.
So the potential reduction in production, but that additional cost, like that, just about monetary terminology, that's going to add up.
It's very hard to put a cost on, because it really depends what you're sending and then the value of the carcass. But like you're chatting from stuff that I've seen anyway for Northern, I think it was like 3-4%, maybe even more, was going to add to the cost of getting product into the EU market. In studies that were done in the past. So it's very difficult to say the actual cost because you don't know how long the delays are going to be, or what level the checks had to go to. But it definitely adds cost and bureaucracy and red tape that pits off maybe customers in the EU as much as adds cost.
And look, we are talking about adding costs. Probably have to be something we're very cognizant of at the moment too. We're heavily dependent on transport. A lot of that would have went through the UK as well. The complications of that at the moment, particularly in the light of COVID and maybe the need for negative COVID tests and getting into France and other countries, how has that impacted the movement of our lamb?
Yeah, well, you'll see that there's been a shift from companies using sort of the direct, the UK land bridge, to get to Europe, and there's been a redirection then to just use the ferries instead. I think the ferries, traditionally the UK land bridge was a wee bit quicker and it was a wee bit cheaper, but companies have just sort of shifted now to using the direct ferry access, because I suppose you're just removing that bureaucracy of having to pass through the UK. So with the increased ferry sales directly from Ireland to the EU markets, I suppose a lot of companies have maybe shifted their focus towards going direct to that market rather than the UK land bridge.
Look, if we just maybe back to the global perspective for a moment, like I suppose in the Southern Hemisphere, they're into the real swing of production system, so they are. How is that trade looking for this year? Like we've seen difficulties in Australia over the past year. New Zealand, you mentioned about the shift in where they're supplying, but the overall lamb crop on it. Where is that at the moment, Seamus?
Well, overall, as you said, there was a decline there in what New Zealand had to export in 2020, and that worked obviously to our benefit. And they are not expected to get back to that to sort of pre-levels this year either. They had quite a poor lamb crop, was back by 3 to 4%. And then there's obviously some flock rebuilding going on, so it sort of limits then the availability sort of product that they have for export. And as we've already discussed, they've sort of redirected a lot of their product towards those Asian markets and away from the EU. And then as we move into Australia, then their availability for export is expected to increase this year, sort of as they come off the back of the impacts of drought and things. So there's expected to be an increase in sort of what they have to export this year. But they are primarily focused, in the Middle East, North Africa, China. They don't really send much into the European market. But obviously there's some growth expected there in what they're offering. I suppose another key area in terms of the impact on the global thing would be sort of the Middle East and North Africa. They would import a lot of live sheep and also sheep meat. A lot of what they use sheep meat is in food service and tourism, and obviously that was badly impacted this year due to sort of COVID restrictions. So there is expected to be a recovery now in the demand from that market this year, for both live imports and for meat. And to take us back, maybe not to 2019 levels, but definitely an improvement, and that'll have an impact on the global sheep meat trade because they're a big importer.
Look, when we talk about developing markets, the States it's there. We've been talking about it for a while. Its potential as a market for Irish lamb.
Yeah, the US, like for the size of it, has quite a small production base for lamb. It's not one of their key proteins. I think they only produced 66,000 tonnes of lamb last year in total. Now there is growing demand for lamb in the US, but it's coming off quite a low base. I think consumption is looking at about half a kilo or so. Now it is a high value import market, and they're currently importing a lot of what they do from Australia and New Zealand, but it definitely has opportunities for us if we can just get our foot in the door. There's a few technical issues, I think, stopping access at the minute, but that's what we're working on. But hopefully we can just get her in. We have a very good story to sell in terms of our grass fed and everything Irish sells well in America.
It's any other potential markets going, and that would be a high value one to get into as well. So hopefully we look forward to seeing developments on it. Look, if I just put you back over something else, and it brings us into our markets back at the moment, and particularly from this stage of the year on, we talked about carcass, so it's been back half a kilo, maybe less heavy lambs coming into it, which can be potentially a challenge for the market this time of the year. That response to price issue, we've seen a drop in that carcass weight, but supplying in spec lambs, has an impact on where we can sell the lamb and what we can do with it. Maybe just, Seamus, you refresh some of the kind of key targets we need to be hitting in that and its importance.
Yeah, carcass weight is probably one of the biggest ones. It impacts the size of the cuts, and then obviously the markets then that you can go into with those cuts. Like producing an in-spec lamb, basically when it goes into the processing plant, it can be used then to service any potential customer. You're just very more limited with your sort of market outlets for your heavy lamb. So most of the markets, like the supermarkets there, it does vary over the year, but you're chatting like 18 to 22 kilos for your supermarket spec for your lamb. The butchers maybe a wee bit heavier. And our key export markets have a very similar sort of request in terms of carcass weight, like 22 kilos, 23 kilos is their cut off in terms of carcass weight. And at a particular time of the year, it could be 21 kilos. And then some of our other markets, Belgium and Germany are looking for an even lighter carcass. So carcass weight is a big one. I suppose there's other things that need to be considered as well. I suppose quality assurance is one of them. There at the minute just about 60% of the lamb that we process is quality assured. But there is growing demand for that to be increased. Our domestic market specifications from the customers are looking for quality assured, 100% quality assured in most cases, and the export markets at the minute are now coming back and asking, we have quality assured beef, why can we not have quality assured lamb as well? And I suppose just about we need quality assurance to just help build the identity of Irish lamb on our key markets, and there is an appetite for quality assurance in some of them key markets, because it sort of proves the credentials of Irish product and means we can market it a lot better.
It'll help open more doors.
Yeah, exactly, and keep the existing doors open. The customers are going to be increasingly asking for sustainability and traceability and things, and the quality assurance can't stand over that. And having that logo on it does open doors for our products.
Look, I'm just conscious of time with you too, James, but I suppose one of the positive stories of last year was the increase in demand domestically, and maybe a renewed interest in lamb during 2020.
Yeah, there was. I suppose lamb of all the proteins would be the most heavily reliant on the food service sector. I think about 45% I think of our lamb sold domestically went through food service. So obviously closure of COVID, due to COVID or whatever, obviously had the potential to have the biggest impact on lamb. So it was very encouraging to see the growth in retail sales now to sort of counteract some of that. Now it didn't make up all of the ground maybe lost by food service, but it certainly helped. So I think overall our spend on lamb increased by nearly 5% last year, and volume was up I think by about 4%. So it is encouraging, and there's lamb visibility on the supermarket shelves has improved. I've seen it a lot. When I've been in a few of the different retailers, there's also been an increase maybe in the number of people, slight increase in the number of people buying lamb, and their weight purchased and things have increased. So they're all very, very positive trends. It's just about continuing maybe to supply a consistent product, maybe that meets the needs of the customers, and then that relates back to to producing lambs that are the right spec and the right carcass weight.
Like hopefully, what we'll see is one of the challenges we know we have in the sector is getting younger people eating. Hopefully, the past 12 months, if it did anything for us, it will have introduced more of them to the quality product that it is.
Yeah, that's it. And hopefully everyone was at home and mommy was teaching them how to cook it.
Very good. Look, maybe just to finish up with you, Seamus, like overall, the outlook for 2021, I suppose from production or price or export prospects, where do you see it going? And I know a little bit of this is crystal ball gazing, but
yeah,
we'll just get your insights as a wrap up to it.
Well, production wise, anyway, there's expected to be a reduced carryover of hoggets into 2021. As I said, there was an extra week's kill last year. There is which took lambs out of the system. Then there's the reduced imports from Northern Ireland, and then there was the surge or the earlier killing of lambs in those summer months, and the contribution of all them plus the higher levels of ewe lamb retention have all sort of contributed maybe to a decline in the hogget carryover of maybe 80 to 90,000 is what we're sort of looking at. Now, I suppose then production-wise, longer term, then we've seen a reduction in the ewe kill. We've seen more ewe lambs being retained, and then you've seen reports in the press of higher scanning rates being recorded. So looking further down the line, we're expecting increased supplies of lambs coming on. Now, price prospects, I'm never really comfortable predicting price, but the trade's expected to stay strong. It's a very supply demand driven market, and supplies are expected to remain tight in Q1, so that will hopefully help maintain a floor under the prices. I suppose one of the big things that maybe could impact our price is sort of the amount of product that New Zealand is sending into the EU, and at the minute, and how much it's redirecting into China. So any shift in that has the potential to sort of impact the trade. Easter, then also Easter, and one of the Muslim festivals, Ramadan, both occur in early April, which I suppose is expected to give sort of a peak in demand for lamb, which will help keep a floor under prices. But overall, like the lamb trade is very much driven by supply and demand, and that'll be the key drivers in the price for next year. Export wise, as I said, China's the key driver in the global sheep meat market. So the amount that they take off the global market will have an impact for ourselves. In terms of our priorities, I suppose it's just about looking at the EU primarily, because it's our closest and our most important market, and there has been opportunities there, just due to lower imports, lower production, and then the decline in the UK is sort of what their offering is to the EU, and that further expected decline next year. On the international scale, then we'll continue to work at accessing China and the US. They're probably two sort of our key focuses is getting product into, I suppose, China, just because it opens, as well as the demand in the Chinese market, it opens opportunities in other Asian markets as well, and then the US, because there is growing demand for lamb there.
James, certainly is changing times in the sector. Look, thanks. You went through a lot there for us in that episode, so you have. We're going to try and get you back on maybe later in the year. We'll have a recap of how some of these things have impacted trade.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. Thanks very much.
Okay, we're going to finish things up at this point. Again, it's been a busy 12 months in the sheep meat trade, and it looks promising for the months to come and opportunities for the sector. I'd like to thank Seamus again for giving up his time to be with us and going through so much detail on the world markets, domestic markets, and where he sees trade going for the coming 12 months. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates on the sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciaran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.